It was around midnight on a chilly Saturday night in March when I made a decision that I would regret for a long time. I had just left a friend's place in San Diego after a long, exhausting day. The drive home to Riverside was a 2-hour stretch of mostly empty highway, something I had done countless times before. But that night, it felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, a thick, almost suffocating stillness that settled over the road like a fog. It wasn't a physical fog, but a kind of unnatural quiet, the kind that makes your skin prickle and the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. As I started my drive, I tried to shake off the feeling. How bad could it be? A simple drive, just a couple of hours. I had done it before, and surely I'd do it again. I set the car's cruise control and let the hum of the engine and the occasional whir of passing trucks lull me into a false sense of calm. The faint sound of classic rock on the radio kept me company, but something felt off. The radio seemed distant, almost as though the music was coming from another world entirely. It didn't help that the further I drove, the darker the night seemed to grow. By the time I was about 30 minutes out, the city lights had faded behind me, leaving only the bleak, desolate highway stretching out before me. My GPS was acting strange. It kept flashing red, rerouting me, insisting I take an exit that wasn't on my usual route. I brushed it off at first, assuming it was just a glitch. But soon the words "recalculate" flashed across the screen and I realized something wasn't right. Maybe there was an accident ahead, or construction. The thought of a detour was less than ideal, but it seemed harmless enough. I took the exit. Immediately everything shifted. The road narrowed and the thick trees on either side closed in like sentinels, their dark, looming shapes merging with the night. The headlights of my car barely pierced the darkness, illuminating just enough of the road to keep me from veering off into the trees. I was alone out here, truly alone. No other cars, no signs of life, just me, the road, and the vast, oppressive silence that seemed to swallow everything. The sense of unease crept in slowly, like ice water creeping up my spine. The road twisted ahead, winding through dense woods with sharp, unpredictable turns. It was as if the road itself was conspiring against me, pulling me deeper into the darkness. And then my gas gauge, already hovering near empty, warned me it was even lower than I thought. Panic settled in. There was no sign of another car, no sign of civilization, just miles of endless trees and shadow. I had to keep going. There had to be something ahead, anything. Then, just when I thought I might drive off the edge of the earth, I saw it. A faint glow, almost as if the darkness itself was cracking open. A small, run-down gas station sat in the distance, a beacon in the night. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It looked like the kind of place that had been frozen in time, a relic of a bygone era, the faded fluorescent lights flickering overhead. The cracked pavement and the sign, half-missing letters, gave the place a haunted, abandoned feel. Still, I was desperate, and I pulled up to the pump. No other cars, no life. Not a sound except for the hum of the lights. I stepped out of the car, the cold air biting into my skin, and walked toward the pump. Only then did I notice the oddity. The pump was one of the old models, the ones where you had to prepay inside. Of course, I muttered under my breath, irritated at my own forgetfulness. I pushed the door open and the squeak of the hinges seemed unnaturally loud in the eerie silence. As soon as I entered, the musty air hit me, thick with the scent of old wood and stale cigarette smoke. Behind the counter, an old man sat, staring blankly ahead, his face half obscured by shadows from the flickering light above him. His presence was unsettling. There was something about his eyes that seemed to follow me, though he didn't move, didn't speak. I walked up to the counter, and handed him a $20 bill for the gas. He took it without a word, his gaze lingering a fraction too long on my face. My stomach tightened. I forced myself to look away, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. I turned quickly, eager to leave. But as I grabbed the pump and started filling up, I couldn't help but glance back at the store. The old man was still there, standing motionless behind the counter, his eyes fixed on me through the window, his face partly obscured by the shadows. Something about that gaze sent a jolt of cold fear straight through me. I finished pumping the gas as quickly as I could and got back in my car, slamming the door behind me. The engine roared to life, but the eerie silence still clung to the air. I didn't look back as I pulled out of the station. It felt like I was being followed, watched by unseen eyes. Every turn, every shadow in my periphery seemed to whisper my name. The road ahead stretched endlessly, the dark trees pressing in around me, suffocating in their silence. Then my headlights caught something in the road. At first I thought it was an animal, but as I got closer I realized it was just an old tire. The sight startled me, and I swerved slightly to avoid it. My heart hammered in my chest. I glanced in my rearview mirror. There was no one behind me. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, trying to calm my nerves. But then, the headlights appeared. At first, I thought it was just another car, maybe a late-night traveler on the same lonely road. But as I checked my mirror again, I realized something was off. The car was still behind me, but it wasn't moving any faster, wasn't gaining any ground. It just stayed there, perfectly aligned with my rear view. I sped up. The car behind me matched my pace. My hands gripped the wheel, my palms clammy, my pulse quickening. There was something wrong with this. The road was too narrow to pull over, so I kept driving, trying to keep my cool. But the car kept its distance, staying just close enough to be unsettling, just far enough to make me doubt my senses. And then, I caught a glimpse of it. A beat-up sedan. The paint was chipped, the body faded and rusted. The driver's seat was empty, or at least that's what it looked like. The headlights burned bright, almost too bright, illuminating everything in their path. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't see the driver's face. It was obscured by shadows, by the darkness, as if they were trying to hide themselves. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that this wasn't just some random person driving down the road. The car was waiting, watching. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing that made sense in that moment. I veered off onto a dirt road. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I accelerated, bouncing over rocks and potholes, trying to lose them to escape whatever strange pursuit this was. My heart was in my throat, my breath shallow. The sound of the engine was drowned out by the thumping of my pulse in my ears. I finally came to a stop, my car hidden in the blackness of the road. The engine died, and for a moment I thought I might have lost them. I waited. I held my breath, and then, just as I was about to breathe a sigh of relief, I saw the glow of headlights cutting through the darkness. The sedan had found the dirt road. I slouched down in my seat, barely breathing, my heart in my mouth. The car crept forward, slow, deliberate. The headlights bathed everything in their harsh light, but the driver, whoever they were, remained hidden in the shadows. They passed by. The seconds felt like hours. I waited, holding my breath, not daring to move, not daring to make a sound. After what felt like an eternity, I saw the sedan's lights fade into the distance. The road was empty. The silence returned, but this time it felt even deeper, more oppressive. I started my car and drove again, not looking back. The road ahead was empty, and yet the unease didn't leave me. It followed me like a shadow, hanging over me, a constant reminder that something had been watching. waiting. When I finally reached home, the first light of dawn was beginning to creep over the horizon. The sun, still hidden behind the trees, painted the sky with a faint, eerie glow. I sat in my car for a long time, my hands still shaking, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone or something had been right there with me, trailing me through the dark. I never saw that car again, but every time I drive at night, every time the darkness seems to stretch on forever, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, that something is out there, waiting. It was the fall of last year when I experienced something so bizarre that even now I struggle to explain it. I had just finished a grueling business trip in upstate New York, 3 days packed with back-to-back meetings and endless stress. By the time my final meeting wrapped up, it was already late, and I was desperate to get home. I had a long drive ahead of me, but I figured I could power through it. After all, it was just a few hours on the road, and I had done it countless times before. The evening was crisp and cool, with a thick fog rolling in, settling over the quiet roads like a blanket. It was the perfect weather for a solitary drive through the winding backcountry roads. I left around 8 p.m., and about an hour into my journey, I realized just how hungry I was. I hadn't eaten much that day, and the fog was thickening, making it hard to see even a few feet in front of me. I knew I needed a break before continuing, so I started scanning the roads for a place to stop. That's when I saw it. A small diner, barely visible through the fog. Its neon open sign flickered dimly, casting a pale glow that barely cut through the mist. I pulled into the parking lot, noticing an old rusted sedan parked at an odd angle near the entrance. The place looked run down, like it hadn't been updated in decades, but the warm light from the inside felt oddly inviting. I figured a quiet meal would be the perfect way to shake off the stress of the day. As I stepped inside, the bell above the door jingled softly, and I immediately felt uneasy. The diner was nearly empty, except for one man sitting at the counter. He was older, his face hidden in shadow as he sipped from a coffee mug and stared straight ahead, his posture stiff and unmoving. He didn't acknowledge my presence, but I could feel his eyes on me, like he was sizing me up. The waitress, a woman with a strange, distant air, gave me a polite nod, silently motioning for me to choose a seat. I opted for a booth near the window, glancing out at the thick fog swallowing up the parking lot. The diner was eerily quiet, with only the faint hum of the jukebox playing an old jazz tune I didn't recognize. It felt soothing, yet oddly unsettling, as if time itself had paused in this forgotten place. The waitress came over and handed me a menu, flashing a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She seemed distant, almost as if she weren't really there at all. I ordered a coffee and a burger, and she nodded, jotting it down without a word, then disappeared into the back. As I waited, an uncomfortable stillness filled the air. The diner felt frozen in time. Old advertisements, faded Coca-Cola posters, and an ancient smoking section sign adorned the walls, though there wasn't a soul smoking. The man at the counter hadn't moved a muscle, his eyes never leaving the dimly lit space in front of him. And the waitress? She vanished into the back again, leaving me completely alone in the main dining area. I tried to shake the growing unease, but it clung to me like the fog outside. After a few minutes, she returned with my coffee, setting it down with a slight smile before retreating back to the counter. I took a sip, the warmth offering a brief comfort, but the silence gnawed at me. It was too quiet. The kind of quiet that felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. Soon my burger arrived. I dug in, trying to push away the mounting tension that crawled up my spine. But just as I was halfway through my meal, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I glanced up and saw that the man at the counter was now staring directly at me. His eyes were cold, unblinking, almost as if he could see straight through me. He spoke then, his voice low and gravelly, the words slicing through the silence like a knife. "Not many folks stop here anymore," he said, his voice carrying a strange weight. "Yeah," I replied, trying to force a smile, "just heading home." He gave a slow, deliberate nod, still watching me with that chilling, unreadable expression. Then his lips curled into a small, unsettling smirk. "This road's got a bit of a reputation. People see things here." My stomach churned, but I couldn't help myself. "Like what?" I asked, curiosity edging into my voice despite the unease growing inside me. He chuckled, a low, unsettling sound that seemed to echo too long in the silence. "People go missing. They say they see things they can't explain. If I were you, I'd get back on the road before it gets too late." I forced out a nervous laugh, trying to play it off. "Thanks for the advice, but I think I'll be fine." He didn't respond, just kept staring at me, his eyes never leaving mine. The waitress shot me a quick, almost imperceptible glance as if warning me to leave, but said nothing. I quickly finished my meal, paid the bill, and nodded to the waitress as I stood to leave, eager to get away from the unnerving atmosphere. When I stepped outside, the fog was even thicker than before, swallowing up the diner's warm glow, leaving only an eerie haze. I glanced back, half expecting to see the man watching me from the window, but when I looked, there was nothing, just an empty, dimly lit diner. It was as if the place had consumed all the light, all the life, leaving nothing behind but an oppressive emptiness. I got into my car and started the engine, eager to put as much distance between myself and that unsettling place as possible. But as I pulled away, I noticed something strange. The diner, it was gone. I glanced in my rearview mirror, but there was no sign of it. No faint glow, no outline of the building, nothing. Just an empty stretch of foggy road. My heart raced and I sped up, trying to shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. The fog continued to thicken, clinging to the road like a nightmare, and the air felt heavy, dreamlike, surreal. I pressed on, but then I saw something in my rearview mirror. Headlights. Bright, glaring headlights, following me. I couldn't tell if it was the man from the diner or just my mind playing tricks, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The headlights stayed with me, their glare unwavering, no matter how fast I drove. I could feel the presence behind me, like something dark, something waiting. The lights stayed for miles, following me until suddenly they faded into the fog, leaving me alone once again. I didn't feel any better. If anything, I felt worse, the feeling of being hunted gnawing at me. When I finally reached home, my hands were still shaking. I immediately searched online, hoping to find some record of the diner, a name, anything to prove it was real. But there was nothing. No mention of a diner on that stretch of road. No mention of a strange man or an eerie waitress. It was as if the place never existed at all, like it had been a figment of my imagination. But I know what I saw. I've driven that same route several times since, hoping to catch a glimpse of the diner. But it's never been there again. To this day, I still can't explain what happened. But one thing's for sure. There are places where reality bends, where the rules of the world don't quite apply. And sometimes, the things we encounter on lonely, foggy roads don't stay behind us. They follow us, waiting for the right moment to reappear. It was around 11:30 p.m. when I finally left the coffee shop where I worked part-time as a barista in a small town in Nevada. The late-night shifts always dragged on, but tonight had been particularly long. I had stayed later than usual to help close up, and now, exhausted but with a heavy heart, I knew I had about an hour's drive ahead of me. Mostly desolate stretches of highway with no signs of life for miles. I wasn't looking forward to it, but I didn't want to crash on the employee couch. That old, stained relic of a couch hadn't seen comfort in decades. The thought of spending another minute in that dingy coffee shop was unbearable. I shrugged on my coat, grabbed my thermos of coffee, and braced myself for the drive. The streets were eerily quiet as I pulled onto the highway. The headlights cut through the dark, casting long shadows against the barren desert landscape. The first half hour of the drive was uneventful. The radio played soft country tunes, and the dim glow of the dashboard lights illuminated the dark cabin, casting a comforting glow. There's an odd peace you only get when driving alone in the dead of night. The kind of peace where the world outside feels like it's holding its breath. But that peace was short-lived. About halfway through my drive, I saw something up ahead. Just a shadow at first, standing motionless by the side of the road. My headlights barely caught the figure, but it was enough to make me slow down. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe just a trick of the light. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a trick. It was a woman. Her face was obscured by long dark hair, but her posture was unnerving, arms lifted, hand waving in a frantic, almost desperate motion. What in the world? Who would be standing out here on a deserted highway at midnight? My gut instinct told me to keep driving, to avoid getting involved. But as I passed, I took one more glance in the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it. She hadn't turned to watch me drive away. Her gaze was locked forward, still waving her arm, unmoving. It felt wrong, as if she were frozen in time, or worse, waiting. My heart rate quickened, but I forced myself to shake it off. People did strange things late at night. I couldn't afford to overthink it. But that unsettling feeling lingered. Minutes later, the check engine light flickered on. I cursed under my breath, eyes darting to the dashboard. The gas gauge was dangerously low, even though I had filled up earlier. I blamed it on my car's quirks. Maybe the fuel line was acting up again. Still, I could feel the anxiety clawing at me. I was in the middle of nowhere, with no cell service and no help for miles. If my car broke down, I would be stuck here until morning. Suddenly, the headlights of another car appeared in my rearview mirror, and relief washed over me. Maybe they could help if something went wrong. I kept driving, but the car behind me started gaining on me at an alarming speed. I squinted through the windshield, struggling to make out the shape of the vehicle. The headlights were blinding, forcing me to squint, but it was clear the car wasn't just speeding. It was right on my tail, too fast. Before I could react, the car swerved into the other lane, pulling up alongside me. I tried to glance over, hoping to make eye contact, maybe get a signal for help, but the windows were dark, completely black. There was nothing inside the car. No driver, no passengers, just empty darkness. The car stayed beside me for a few seconds, matching my speed. I could hear the hum of its engine as it silently glided next to mine. My pulse pounded in my throat as I gripped the steering wheel. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the car swerved back in front of me, cutting me off. It slowed down to a crawl, the brake lights glowing in the dark, forcing me to slow down with it. I had no choice but to follow. The car's presence was suffocating. My heart hammered in my chest. Why were they doing this? It felt like some twisted game. I had no idea who was in that car or what they wanted, but I could feel their gaze through the darkened windows, watching me. After what felt like an eternity, the car sped up again and disappeared into the night. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, trying to calm my frayed nerves. But just as I thought I was safe, I saw something else up ahead. The woman. The same woman. She was standing in the middle of the road now, her arm raised in that same unnatural wave, her face still obscured by long dark hair. Panic surged through me. I slammed on the brakes, the car coming to a screeching halt just a few feet from her. My pulse roared in my ears. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, staring straight ahead, her hand held high in that eerie, impossible wave. Every rational instinct told me to drive away, but I couldn't move. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out of there, but my body refused to obey. She was too still, too unnatural, and then, without a word, her arms slowly lowered and she started walking, no, gliding, toward the side of the road, vanishing into the darkness. I didn't wait for her to fully disappear. As soon as I saw a clear path, I floored the gas pedal, speeding down the highway as fast as I could. No way was I stopping for anyone again. Not tonight, not ever. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see her there, standing in the middle of the road, watching me. But there was nothing. Only the winding stretch of dark highway behind me. The rest of the drive was a blur. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had happened. Was she real? Was it some kind of prank? A hallucination from exhaustion? Or maybe something worse? When I finally pulled into the gas station on the edge of town, I was shaking so badly that I could barely get out of the car. The fluorescent lights and the hum of the pumps were a lifeline, anchoring me back to reality. I filled up the tank, paid inside, and left without saying a word to the clerk. But even after all that, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong, the eerie sense of being watched, the sensation that I wasn't alone. I never saw the woman again, nor the strange car that had followed me. I told myself it was just a bad night, that it was nothing. But every time I drive that stretch of highway now, the unease creeps back. The sound of an engine in the distance makes my heart skip a beat. The shadows seem a little deeper, the road a little lonelier. And sometimes, just sometimes, when I glance in my rearview mirror, I think I catch a glimpse of something. A shadow, a figure standing there, watching. A chill runs down my spine, and I can't help but wonder if I'm being followed by something far worse than the darkness. Something waiting for me to stop again. If you enjoyed stepping into the darkness with me, just remember this. There's a price to driving alone in the dead of night. A price that not everyone can pay. Some things follow you. Some things never let you go.